So hello everybody and welcome back. Today I'm going to be discussing world building. World building is something that fantasy fans like. They like exploring new imaginary worlds and magic systems. It's arguably one of the central motivations for the consumption of the genre. And there are a lot of things that go into good world building. You've probably heard about most of them, and if you haven't, you can look them up. There's lots of people discussing them. Yet there's one thing that I believe is often overlooked or rarely resolved when it is brought up, that you as a fantasy writer might neglect in your work. And that's balancing your world with the actual storytelling. The issue is that taking the time to establish rules or background lore can put a stall on things like pacing and character development, slowing down the story and making the reader lose interest. Lore dumps, exposition dumps, etc. Yuck. You also can't guarantee that the audience will want to learn a whole bunch about a new world, as it might not be why they're reading in the first place. They might not want a whole bunch of lore. They might be more interested in the more traditional storytelling elements of character and plot. I also believe that this is what makes much of fantasy, especially amongst novels, as kind of a niche genre that is limited in its appeal to more general audiences who are not as inherently vested in learning a bunch about fake history and fake places. But even if you're absolutely enthralled by world building, you probably still aren't going to enjoy a fantasy story that's more like a fake history textbook than an actual story. So how do we resolve this issue? Well, to answer this question, I'll be taking a look today at Mistborn: The Final Empire, or as I call it, Mistborn 1. What this story manages to do is tell an engaging story while also building a vibrant and quite complex world without either of the two having a negative effect on each other. This world is filled with all kinds of people, politics, institutions, and places. We're introduced to so many of these things, yet the actual story maintains its momentum for nearly its whole duration. But how exactly is this done? In a nutshell, what Mistborn does is it makes every introduced element of the world an active part of the story. What I mean by this is that the rules, people, and institutions of this world are what make the story what it is. They don't just sit there statically as, say, background lore would. Instead, they are pertinent and present in every moment of the story. The book does this in many ways, but I'll be focusing on just a few prominent examples to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. One of the most iconic pieces of Mistborn's world is the magic system, allomancy. And allomancy on its own, is kind of like a cool tool or weapon that the characters use, and a lazy writer would just leave it at that, as just a MacGuffin. But the book takes it a step further. As Vin learns about allomancy, she grows as a person. Her identity, her perceptions, her relationships are all changing the more she goes through this journey of learning about allomancy. Allomancy allows Vin to go from a lonely, untrusting street urchin to being a valued member of a family and to gain greater purpose as a person. Vin's study of allomancy becomes a very deep and personal voyage that the reader can be invested in. Therefore, the magic system is elevated beyond just a trinket of the world that we're forced to sit and read about. Any student who's experienced this with an uninteresting subject at school can understand what I'm talking about. Allomancy also lets Vin get closer with her friends, in particular Kelsier. There is also significant plot relevance associated with allomancy. The institutions, power structures, the noble houses, the adium monopoly, and the Lord Ruler's reign are all based on allomancy. It is what enables the status quo of the world to exist. And allomancy is also the tool with which the main characters hope to change that status quo. And changing the status quo, whether on a personal scale or a world scale, is the point of a story. Essentially, allomancy and everything it's associated with are meant to set the conditions unique to the story that the characters find themselves in, and also to provide the means of changing those conditions. By connecting personal and practical stakes to the magic system, it becomes more interesting for the reader to learn about. We see this similar dynamic with other aspects of the world. The Mistwraith isn't just a wacky creature, it becomes an ally. The Pits of Hathsin aren't just some place, they provide the adium that gives the Lord Ruler his power and are also a point of character development for Kelsier as he destroys the thing that broke him in the past. And even though Vin exploring the noble houses is probably the slowest part of the book, it's still engaging because we know what the end goal is. We anticipate the payoff of the houses descending into chaos to serve the main character's plans. It's also intriguing to watch Vin lose her sense of identity while making the infiltration. This makes what would be boring political nonsense into engaging world exploration. I understand that for many of you, world building might be an extremely fascinating aspect of fantasy. I get that, but if you have writing aspirations and want your work to have any success, you need to understand that many other people, including fellow fantasy fans, also desire an engaging story. And by emulating Mistborn's strategy of meshing the two, you can achieve this harmony. Hopefully this breakdown provided some sense of how to meld these two things together. If you haven't read Mistborn or haven't in a long time, I recommend that you do so as there are a lot of lessons to learn from it. Thank you for watching. I hope that you took something beneficial away from this video, and if you liked it, consider subscribing. I will be doing more of these things in the future. I will continue exploring fantasy writing techniques, looking into successes and failures and seeing what we can all learn from them.